Photographs can be incredibly powerful. They can capture some of the most important moments in time,
or the everyday and mundane moments of life's long past.
These are some rarely seen historical photographs and the stories behind them.
Roberta Louise Gibb, better known as Bobby Gibb, seen here without a number after completing the Boston Marathon, was the first ever woman to run the entirety of the Boston Marathon in 1966. Prior to Bobby's participation in the event, the longest amateur athletic union sanctioned race for women was only 1.5 miles, and even after Bobby's unofficial run, the Boston Marathon didn't open up a women's division for the race until 1972, 6 years after Bobby became the pre-sanctioned era women's winner in 1966. Prior to becoming the first woman to participate in the race, albeit unofficially, Bobby trained for 2 years, covering as much as 40 miles per day. Prior to the race, she had actually requested to join as an official participant, but her request was denied due to the fact that, according to the race director, Will Cloney, women were not physiologically capable of running marathon distances. On the day of the race, Bobby donned her brother's Bermuda shorts and a large hoodie and waited until about half the runners were on their way before joining in. Partway through the race, moved by the support of her fellow runners, she removed her hoodie and revealed herself as a woman. When she reached the end of the race, 3 hours, 21 minutes, and 40 seconds after her start time, the government of Massachusetts, John Vlope, was waiting to shake her hand.
Pictured here is a woman named Ina Squire Brown. She was a professional dancer and, as you can clearly see, soon to be married. Her fiance was Royal Air Force Officer J.C. Martin. What's incredible about this image is when and where it was taken. November 5th, 1940 in London. The photo was colorized a couple years back. All that rubble you see on the lawn, that was part of her home, which had just recently been bombed. And the craziest part was that the bombing had been going on for months and would continue on for months. On September 7th of 1940, the Germans began dropping bombs on English towns and cities in what was referred to as a blitzkrieg, which translates to lightning war. And for 57 consecutive nights, the bombs continued to fall. London was hit the hardest, but this was happening all over the country. So this photo was taken in the midst of all that. An image that perfectly captures the strength and perseverance of the greatest generation. Despite the chaos, the uncertainty, their home crumbling around them, and by that I mean their city and by extension the entire country, Ina Squire Brown, pictured here with her father and neighbor, had smiles on their faces and were going on about their lives. They kept calm and carried on.
Starting off our list today with Christopher Lloyd, because if we're going to talk about celebrities time traveling, we have to include the celebrity who brought the concept of time travel into the mainstream of pop culture 39 years ago with the release of Back to the Future. That's right, it is entirely possible that not only does Christopher Lloyd play a time traveler, but that he actually is one too. Before you start calling me crazy in the comments, 1, remember you are the one who decided to click on this video, and 2, take a look at this. This being a side-by-side image of Christopher Lloyd and John C. Calhoun. John C. Calhoun being a vocal statesman from South Carolina who also served as the 7th Vice President of the United States from 1925 to 1932. The resemblance is uncanny, likely because they're not actually two separate men, but rather because Christopher Lloyd, as he is known today, really is John C. Calhoun, as he was known back in the 1800s.
Coming in at number 10 is North Korea camp. North Korean prison camps are a place of horror. Now this photo was taken at one of their camps called Chonggori Camp. The main purpose of Chonggori Camp is to punish people for usual crimes or political crimes such as illegal border crossings. Now the prisoners here are also used as slave laborers, and as a result they are forced to do hard and dangerous work for 14 hours a day. The prisoners live in crowded, dirty, insect-infested rooms without heating, while there is just one washing room for 1,000 prisoners. Now because of these bad hygienic conditions, in the summer of 2003, about 190 prisoners died of an infectious disease. Now 70 prisoners sleep in a room which is only designed to hold 20 people, lying on the floor without pillows or blankets. Not to mention, prisoners only get 140 grams of rice 3 times a day, while they're being forced to do do hard labor such as logging with iron chains. Now often prisoners have their lives ended or they are crippled in work accidents. Prisoners are regularly subjected to beatings and inhumane treatment, all of which are administered by the guard's discretion. When a prisoner breaks a rule, he is tormented and confined in a solitary cell so small where he cannot stretch his legs for many days or weeks. Now many people say these camps have human rights violations, and with everything we do know, I can't imagine all the other horrors of the other camps. Number 9. Dorothy Counts. Dorothy Counts is an American civil rights pioneer and one of the first black students admitted to the Harry Harding High School. In 1956, 40 black students from North Carolina applied to transfer to a white school after the passing of the Purcell Plan. Dorothy's family applied her and her 2 brothers to enroll in an all-white school after her father was approached by Kelly Alexander Sr. Now of her family, only Dorothy was accepted, and Dorothy was dropped off on her first day of school by her father, along with their family friend, Edwin Tompkins. As their car was blocked from going closer to the entrance, Edwin offered to escort Dorothy to the front of the school while her father parked the car. As she got out of the car to head down the hill, her father told her, "Hold your head high, you are inferior to no one." Now in this photo, you can see her being harassed by her classmates. After just 4 days of harassment that threatened her safety, her parents withdrew her from the school, but the images of Dorothy being verbally assaulted by her white classmates were seen around the world. Number 8. First woman in the Boston Marathon. Catherine Switzer was 20 years old when she decided to run the Boston Marathon in 1967. Now at the time it was an all-male race. Women were not allowed to run and organizers always ridiculed them. Now no one believed a woman could run it, so when Catherine signed up, she signed the necessary paperwork with her initials. When the race started, she set off alongside her boyfriend Tom Miller, and while running, camera crews and photographers from a press bus spotted her and photographed her a lot. Now as this was happening, an official spotted her running. Jock Semple, the race manager, ran after her in leather shoes and tried to rip off her number. "Get the hell out of my race and give me those numbers," he yelled. Now before he could pull her out of the race, Tom blocked him. The idea of women running in the marathon was highly controversial. Now Catherine finished the race, knowing it would look like a publicity stunt if she stopped, and thankfully 5 years later, women were given the right to run in the marathon. Number 7. Last public execution. Eugen Weidmann was a German criminal and serial slayer who was executed by guillotine in France in June 1939, which was the last public execution in France. After a failed first attempt, Eugen and his accomplices managed to successfully kidnap an American woman named Jean de Koven, and Jean was lured to the house the trio rented, and she was strangled to death by Eugen and buried in the backyard. A couple months later, Eugen shot a chauffeur named Joseph Chofi to death and stole his money. Just 2 days later, Eugen ended the life of a woman named Janine Keller. Janine was also shot and robbed. 3 other people had their lives ended by Eugen and his accomplices, all of them being shot to death and then robbed. Eugen's last victim had a business card from Eugen in his house, which resulted in the police tracking down Eugen, since it seemed that he was one of the last people who had seen the victim alive. When confronted, Eugen tried to shoot the 2 policemen who had come to arrest him. However, Eugen was knocked unconscious with a hammer by one of the policemen and promptly taken into custody. He was found guilty of homicide and was sentenced to death. On June 17, 1939, Eugen was beheaded outside the prison in St. Pierre in Versailles. The historical behavior by spectators was so scandalous that French President Albert Lebrun immediately banned all future public executions. Number 6. Erase Nikolai Yezhkov. Nikolai Yezhkov was a Soviet secret police officer under Joseph Stalin who was the head of the NKVD from 1936 to 1938 during the height of the Great Purge. He organized mass arrests, torment, and executions, but then he fell from Stalin's good graces. He was arrested and subsequently admitted in a confession to a range of anti-Soviet activity, including unfound arrests during the Purge. He was executed in 1940 along with others who were blamed for the Purge, and Nikolai was not only ousted, executed, and disgraced erased along with his family. He was then methodically erased from photographs where he had previously appeared with his commander. Overnight, Nikolai went from one of the highest officers in a powerful New World Order to a shadow in a poorly lit photo and a name no one dared to utter. Now, Nikolai wasn't the only person to receive this Photoshop treatment, as it was common in the communist government to deny failures and make inconvenient truths even people disappear. Now, this practice has continued in current communist-led governments where rebellious leaders are removed by force and deleted from official documents. Coming in at number 10 is Anne Frank's attic. For those of you who don't know, Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding from 1942 to 1944 during the German occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. She wrote every day in her diary about her life from her family's hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Her diary was eventually published, and it's now one of the world's best-known books. Now, this photo is not of Anne, but of her father, Otto, in 1960, revisiting the attic where the family hid. He was the sole survivor of his family, so I can't imagine the pain he had revisiting this place. Later, the photographer Arnold Newman recalled taking this photo. He said, "The mood was depressing and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring. Those were the bells that Anne wrote about. He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell his story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself." Number 9. An inmate at the Rab camp. The Rab camp was one of several Italian concentration camps, and it was established during World War II in July 1942 on the Italian-occupied island of Rab, now in Croatia. Estimates of the Commission for Determining the Crimes of the Occupiers say 4,641 detainees died at the camp, including 800 inmates who died while being transported from Rab to other concentration camps in Italy. In July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime in Italy, the camp was closed, but some of the remaining Jewish prisoners were deported by German forces to the extermination camps. Under Italian Army Commander Mario Rotatta's watch, the ethnic cleansing and violence committed against the Slovene civilian population included summary executions, hostage-taking and ending the hostages' lives, reprisals, and the burning of houses and villages. Slovenes and Croatians suffered from cold and hunger in open-air tents, surrounded by barbed wire fence and guarded towers. At its peak, there were up to 15,000 internees. Conditions at the camp were described as appalling, filthy, muddy, overcrowded, and swarming with insects. This photo just shows how much suffering they went through. Number 8. A jail cell from the Salem Witch Trials. This makeshift jail cell truly brings out the horrors of the Salem Witch Trials. These trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. Now, women vastly outnumbered men in the ranks of accused and executed. It was in cells like this one that the accused witches spent their final moments before being executed. Now, it's just sad because we all know that this was just a scare and that they weren't real witches. Many of these women were suspected and chosen because they were simply unliked. Number 7. Pyramids on the Moon. In 1972, this image was taken by Apollo 17 during its flight to the moon near an area known as Geophone Rock. NASA listed the image as blank, but after retouching the photo, you can see that it's not completely blank. Turning up the contrast, a pyramidal structure can be seen. So, what is it? Was it some malfunction of the camera, or is there actually a pyramid on the moon? NASA has never given a credible version of the issue, which has led to some speculations about what actually can be on the moon, hidden from the public. And listen, not to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but maybe it is true that aliens built the pyramids on Earth as they look like they did it on the moon too. I don't know, but it gives you a lot to think about. While this eye looks like it may belong to a scary monster, it's actually a human eye. While rummaging through photographs that capture the devastating impact of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this photo emerged. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together ended the lives between 129,000 and 226,000 people. Most of whom were civilians. When the detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. And heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. Now, this is what the eye of an victim plagued by an atomic rack looks like. While it had been a well-known fact that radiation causes cataracts in animals, the development of atomic cataracts in human beings was noted after the atomic in Japan. Now, it wasn't just this person who suffered from this, but many others as well.
Coming us up today, we have the location of the Maid of Harlech, a Lockheed P-38F Lightning long-range fighter jet whose whereabouts is strictly prohibited from being documented publicly, by a photograph or otherwise. The jet, which was operated during the Second World War, was an incredibly effective weapons craft, night fighter, and observational aircraft. The plane eventually ended up somewhere along the 4-mile Harlech Beach as a result of none other than human error. You see, the pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert F. Elliott of the US military, had taken off using the aircraft's reserve fuel tanks. Not an uncommon practice, but it seems he had forgotten to switch back to the main reserve as 55 minutes into the flight, the left engine lost power. Thinking there was an issue with the engine, Elliott decided to make his way back to the airfield, but before he could, the right engine died too. Elliott made an emergency landing along the shores of the British beach, where luckily no one was injured, and the plane was eventually claimed by the sand. It wasn't until 65 years later in 2007 that the craft was discovered by a civilian. While many locals are aware of the plane's exact location, the distribution of such information is prohibited by the UK government due to its protected status, which was awarded in an attempt to preserve the wreck as well as the wreck site. Next up, we have images of Winnie the Pooh, which became censored in 2017 in China. While China does have a rich history of censorship, in which the ban of Gmail, Google, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as Twitter, now X, are included, no one could have predicted the addition of our honey-loving childhood friend to the list. Images of the funny orange bear became censored after a resemblance was noted between the character and the Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping. The government found the comparison to be a disrespectful mockery of their country's leader and consequently ordered all images of Winnie the Pooh to be blocked from all available search engines, limited as they may be.
Starting off this countdown, we have the secret entrances. Just last year, a man claimed to have found 3 hidden entrances that lead to Area 51. He discovered this after using Google Earth. He compared images of the base from different time periods. In one particular area in 1998, there seems to be no roads or entrance. Satellite pictures of that same location in 2005, 2010, and 2013 show a road and a dead end with what looks like an entrance and tunnel carved into a mountain. In fact, at the dead end, there appears to be cars parked there. Seems unusual for people to just park there, because what is around for them to do? Wander the barren plain alone? No, they're parking their cars there and then entering Area 51 through this secret entrance. In our 9th spot, we have the alien craft. What I'm about to show you is a leaked video and some photos from Area 51 of an alien spacecraft test. The video features a flying object hovering in the sky and moving in ways that other crafts definitely don't do. This was recorded on May 15, 2017, and then was leaked years later. If this isn't actually a UFO, then what could it be? That's what's baffling people. The way it just moves up and down and side to side that quickly is very strange, especially because of its size. What do you think though? Is this proof that Area 51 has gotten their hands on an alien spacecraft? Moving on to number 8, we have the transportation of a UFO. When this next photo was leaked online, it was met with a number of conspiracy theories. So this is the image of the CIA transporting a large part for one of their top secret projects. In fact, when this was getting transported, the CIA sealed off the entire highway. And I'm sure you can see why this was met with a number of conspiracy theories. Like, look at the shape of the thing that they're transporting. That is definitely a UFO or part of a UFO spaceship. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. Somehow, a group of bikers made it onto the road. When they were stopped by some soldiers, they asked what they were transporting, and the soldier said they found a UFO up in the mountains. Now apparently he said this jokingly, but who knows? In our 7th spot, we have the Tic Tac UFO. Last year, another UFO was spotted near Area 51. This one was given the name the Tic Tac UFO because of its tic-tac shape and white or bright appearance. So this spacecraft was caught on footage by a person driving along near Area 51. He was driving along the extraterrestrial highway. That's the name given to the highway in Nevada, as a number of UFOs have been seen by drivers while on this route. At first, the driver thought that what he was seeing was just a cloud. When he got closer to it, he realized that it was definitely a craft of some kind. Later on, alien hunter Scott Waring confirmed that the UFO was in fact alien in origin. Also, the area in which he was driving through had a number of wind farms in the area. Turns out that in the past, a lot of UFOs have been spotted around wind farms, and one UFO even crashed into a windmill many years back. Some say this is because aliens are fascinated with human technology. In our 6th spot, we have Stephen Barron. In 2016, UFO hunter Steve Barron captured video and photographic evidence of another alien spacecraft close to Area 51. These were taken near his home in Las Vegas, Nevada, an hour drive from Area 51. Using a night vision camera, Steve head out to Red Rock Canyon to try and capture a UFO. The first couple of hours, there was nothing. Then he saw mysterious weird flashing lights appear over a mountain. He said this in regards to the UFO and its lights, and I quote, "First one, then two, then more and more. They put on a spectacular show. I am glad I was patient because the show they put on kept getting better and better." We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the CIA spy plane. In 2011, Los Angeles Times journalist Annie Jacobson published a book called Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top secret military base. In the book, she included a number of never-before-seen photos of the base. The first one I want to show you is of a CIA spy plane. This photo shows an A-12 ox cart hidden behind a barrier at Area 51. This was a top-secret plane that was created to reach high speeds and altitudes. During the first 3 years of testing this plane, everything was kept top secret. In fact, the pilots weren't even allowed to tell their wives what they were working on. On May 24, 1963, during a test flight, the plane crashed. The pilot, Ken Collins, was fine but had to eject himself out of the plane. But afterwards, the CIA actually injected him with sodium pentothal, aka truth serum, to then interrogate him after the crash. That's crazy. In our 4th spot, we have the rare photo. So this photo was also featured in Annie Jacobson's book Area 51, an uncensored history of America's top secret military base. In fact, this is a very rare photo that has never been published before. It was published for the first time in Annie's book, and that's it. This photo is an aerial view of Area 51 taken in 1964. I don't know why it was kept a secret for so long or how Annie got her hands on it, but she did and decided to share it with the world. Moving on at number 3, we have the early U-2 spy planes. In the early 1950s, at the peak of the Cold War, the CIA began to develop planes that they wanted to reach an altitude of 70,000 feet to avoid detection against Soviet radar. This gave birth to the U-2 spy planes that you see here in this picture. This photo was taken in Area 51 in 1956, and pictures of workers standing on the plane's wing. Sadly, at least 3 pilots lost their lives during test flights, including 2 at Area 51 and 1 at an Air Force base in Germany. Coming in at number 2, we have Boyd Bushman. Shortly before his death, former Area 51 engineer Boyd Bushman revealed that he encountered aliens while working at Area 51. In a video, Bushman shows a number of mysterious photos to the camera, including one of an alien and a number of photos of the alien's appendages.
We have a total of at least 18 that exist and operate with our facility.
Now, many people believe that this man is telling the truth. Why? Because he had nothing to gain or lose by sharing his story. Plus, an interrogator with the police studied Boyd's movements and speech pattern during this interview, and he said that it appears as if he's telling the truth. In the interview, he said that Area 51 has at least 18 of these aliens in their facility. He also claims that there are two groups of aliens. One group are called the Wranglers, the others are called the Rustlers. The aliens that are considered Wranglers are friendly and have a better relationship with humans. Rustlers, however, have been known to steal cattle. This is all insane. And in our #1 spot today we have Boyd Bushman and the UFO. During his interview, Boyd Bushman also revealed photos of real UFO spacecrafts that he saw while working at Area 51.
Up close and personal, this is a UFO which is ready to take off.
So that's a close-up photo of a UFO spacecraft taking off. Then he also showed a different photo of a UFO spacecraft with its lights turned off. What do you think though? Is Boyd telling the truth? Are those real photos of UFOs? Let me know in the comments.
Next up, we have a series of photos taken during the Great Depression that were banned from being publicly released at the time due to the, well, depressing nature of the content. The photographs were taken by Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, and a number of their colleagues in an attempt to showcase resilient faces in contrast to the backgrounds of ruin in the United States during the depths of the Great Depression. When the photos were presented to the Farm Security Administration, they were not only rejected, but in an attempt to keep them from being published, were hole punched generally directly through the focal point of the image in the hopes of making them unprintable. Ironically, all this did was garner the images that much more fame and recognition, as when they were eventually released, they not only stood for the people's resilience against the economic collapse, but also freedom of the press. Next up, we have America's hidden bunker Mount Pony. The 400-foot long, 140,000 square foot bunker made with 1 foot thick steel reinforced concrete was built in 1969 and was a self-sustaining, fully equipped, radiation-hardened facility designed originally as a safe haven to house up to 540 people for up to 30 days in the case of a nuclear attack. However, in 1988, the bunker became much more, as it was used to store several billion dollars of federal funds that would be used to replenish US currency and restart the economy in an event of a nuclear attack. The money was stored in the bunker for just shy of 10 years until it was relocated in 1997. Understandably, it was incredibly important at the time that any imagery of the bunker's location, layout, and security functions not be released to the public, as it would diminish the secure nature of the underground safe house and holding facility. At our halfway point, we have a series of photographs taken at a United States nuclear power plant depicting the dangerous conditions in which the country stores its nuclear energy, as well as what the plant workers have to endure. A report released by CNN in 2016 showcases the facility in its decrepit state. After the photographs surfaced, nuclear officials used them as an opportunity to request Congress back the administration's push to modernize the facility. Officials also argued that the state of the facility was actually a threat to United States national security goals, and said that many critical utility, safety, and support systems had been failing at a dangerous rate, due largely to the fact that the majority of key nuclear facilities in the US were built during World War II with the intention of operating for just 10 to 15 years, and have therefore outlived their safe operational lifespan. It seems as though the warnings and pleadings of the nuclear officials have gone unheeded and unheard, as the plants depicted in the photographs appear to have undergone no repairs, and presumably just continue to deteriorate. No wonder the government didn't want anyone seeing those photos. It's terrifying, and they're not doing anything about it. Alright, next up we have a photograph of leaked Mexican asylum plans delivered to us by none other than the former United States President Donald Trump. Amidst negotiations with Mexico, Trump called a conference to reveal that he had a secret deal, that is. In the interview, when asked if Trump had made an agreement with Mexico to become a safe third country for asylum seekers, he refused to comment on his discussions with the Mexican president, but instead pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat's breast pocket and said, "That's the agreement that everybody says I don't have." And if you're like most people, you might have assumed that what Trump presented to the reporters was nothing more than a blank sheet of folded paper. Well, you would have assumed wrong, as not only was Trump holding a legitimate government document, but it was legitimately legible, as the sun hit the back of the agreement, illuminating the words printed on the page, which were swiftly captured in a photograph that was enhanced to reveal, long story short, that Mexico was to be considered a safe third country, meaning asylum applicants would be processed in Mexico Mexico instead of the United States, and that in order for this to happen, Mexico would have 45 days to reduce migration to the United States. Next, we have another case of Chinese government censorship, but unfortunately, unlike the last one, which was actually pretty funny, this one really isn't, as it involves the deaths of many Chinese civilians during a student-led protest in 1989. 35 years ago, across China, many civilians joined together to call for a political reform within the Chinese government that would give more freedoms to the citizens of the country, lower inflation, and overall provide a higher quality of life. While the official number is highly debated, it is estimated that several hundred to several thousand people died in the square on June 4th of 1989 when the government flooded the streets with soldiers and tanks in an attempt to silence protesters. During this sad scene, one man really stood out, known only as Tankman. He stood in front of a line of tanks blocking their way down the Chang'an Avenue in Beijing. The capture of this image later became a symbol of endurance for the Chinese people. Of course, the event was not a proud moment in Chinese history for either the citizens, filled with hope and passion and met with loss and destruction, or the government, who in their vanity ended countless lives and created animosity amongst its people. Every year on the anniversary, the Chinese government does its best to suppress the image in an attempt to keep the Chinese people from reflecting too hard on the dark day in history. Starting off our top three, we have Putin in drag. That's right, a circulating image of Putin edited to look as though he is wearing drag makeup, as well as any others that might pop up, have been banned by the Russian government. The image that started it all, which really reminds me of like an Andy Warhol pop art kind of thing, was created by an unknown artist in protest after the anti-gay propaganda law was enacted in Russia, which forbid homosexual acts or discussion in any place where children were present. While the image is, of course, easily available to those of you watching this video, it can still be found in Russia as well, just with a little bit of digging. If you are caught with the image, however, you could receive up to 15 days in a Russian prison or a fine of 3,000 rubles, which at the time the law was put into place was equal to around $53 US. Okay, I am thinking this next one trumps the rest. Well, no, actually, I mean Trump should take a rest from spilling government secrets. I don't know why, but this one actually made me laugh because just reading the headline made me feel like I was being punked. Trump tweets sensitive surveillance images of Iran obtained from a spy satellite. What is going on in the House of Commons? I know that's a Canadian thing, but really. So the image Trump tweeted was of the fallout from a failed Iranian missile launch, and it was taken from a secret spy satellite that no one except officials with incredibly high clearance is supposed to even know about. At first, people wondered if the image had been taken by a drone, since it was so incredibly clear with lots of discernible detail, but aerospace experts quickly determined that it was in fact taken by a satellite. Not only that, but based on the image alone, experts were also able to trace exactly which satellite the image came from. I don't know. It's too much for me. Alright, and to finish us off today, we have another good laugh, as the Thai king, whose name I am scared to even attempt to pronounce, but I will place it somewhere here, has banned all unflattering photos of himself. Now you might think that means that if a person were to capture him mid-yawn or sneeze, they would have to delete the image, in which the king looks a little bit silly and perhaps slightly less than regal. Well, you'd be wrong again, my friends, because this king likes to party. Not only that, but he likes to cover himself in temporary tattoos and party all night long, which usually ends up in the disheveled king dressed in nothing but jeans and a very small crop top or sports bra, heading home in his town car the morning after. Now, for the people of Germany, which is where the Thai king spends most of his time, this is not an uncommon thing to see. But for the people of Thailand, any photos of the king's escapades are censored and banned from being shared with any members of the public.
Number 5. The Babushka Lady. The woman in the brown coat, or the Babushka Lady as she was later called by the FBI, was very close to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, JFK was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination. He denied. Oswald then was as well soon after. These theories allege the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination. Now, according to eyewitnesses though, this woman, the Babushka Lady, filmed the entire thing. It's thought that from her vantage point, she may have been able to answer some critical questions about what really happened that day. However, the FBI was never able to track her down, and no one has since been able to figure out the identity of this mystery observer. Number 4. Human zoos. Yes, you might have thought that zoos were strictly for animals, but once upon a time there were human zoos, which I personally find disgusting. Now, this photo was taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Yeah, you heard that right. The government did this, but are we really that surprised? The zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state, to be seen and gawked at. These zoos were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. These people were zoo attractions among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions. These people were often bound by ropes, and visitors threw peanuts at them. The treatment of these human beings was just awful. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now, overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Now, after the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Number 2. Treatment of a patient with mental illness. This 1890 photo depicts a woman forced into a crucifixion pose and facing a wall. The woman is a patient at a mental institution undergoing treatment. Now, believe it or not, forced standing was considered a legitimate part of treatment for mental illness in 19th century Germany. Now, back in the 18th and early 20th century, women were sometimes institutionalized due to their opinions and their inability to be controlled properly by a primarily male-dominated culture. There were financial incentives too, because before the passage of the Married Women's Property Act 1882, all of a wife's assets passed automatically to her husband. The men who were in charge of these women, either a husband, father, or brother, could send these women to mental institutions, stating they believed that these women were mentally ill because of their strong opinions. These men had the last say when it came to the mental health of these women, so if they believed that these women were mentally ill, or if they simply wanted to silence the voices and opinions of these women, they could easily send them to mental institutions. This is what could have happened to this woman in that photograph. Now, besides standing, practices at these asylums were dark, as they had treatments that included restraints, isolation, electroshock therapy, ice baths, forced drugging, and even lobotomies. And coming in at number 1 is mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the US Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now, officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Obviously, they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. Now, the participants, almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and in some cases were threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress. Number 5. Criminals in a box. This disturbing photo was taken in July 1913 by French photographer Albert Kahn. He often took trips through exotic countries, and it was during a visit in Mongolia that he happened to stumble upon this woman who had been condemned to a slow and painful starvation. She was boxed up in what would become her tomb and deposited in a remote desert. There were bowls of water on the ground, and the prisoner is allowed to beg passerbys for food, though not much is given. Now, the photographer was forced to leave her there, as it would be against prime directive of anthropologists to intervene in a culture's law or order system. Anthropologists are only able to observe, they cannot push their own beliefs or interfere in any way. Now, it's just incredibly disturbing though, and I can't imagine what was going through Albert's mind when he found her. Number 4. The Exorcism of Analise Michael. Analise Michael was a German woman who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites during the year before her death. When she was younger, she experienced a seizure and was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with depression and was treated by a psychiatric hospital. By the time she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. After the taking of psychiatric medications for over 5 years failed to improve her symptoms, Annalise and her family became convinced that she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism, and while rejected at first, 2 priests got permission from the local bishop in 1975. The priest began conducting exorcism sessions, and the parents stopped consulting doctors. She began increasingly speaking about dying to atone of the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. Now, a total of 67 exorcism sessions, 1 or 2 each week, lasting up to hours each, were performed for approximately 10 months in 1975 and 1976. Number 3. Radium Girls. The Radium Girls were female factory workers who contracted radiation poisoning from painting radium dials, watch dials, and hands with self-luminous paint. The incidents occurred at 3 factories in the United States, one in Orange, New Jersey beginning around 1917, one in Ottawa, Illinois beginning in the early 1920s, and one in Waterbury, Connecticut also in the 1920s. Now, after being told that the paint was harmless, the women in each facility ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to point their brushes on their lips in order to give them a fine tip, and some also painted their fingernails, faces, and teeth with the glowing substance. Now, the prolonged exposure to radium caused dental pain, loose teeth, lesions, and ulcers, and the failure of tooth extractions to heal were some of these conditions. Now, many of the women later began to develop anemia, bone fractures, and caused their vertebrae to collapse, their jaws to swell up and fall off, and their lives to slowly end in agony while battling cancer. Now, the photo here shows one of the victims, and it's truly heartbreaking. Number 2. Unit 731. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation and biological weapons manufacturing during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. Now, this photo shows them experimenting on prisoners. It's estimated that this place ended the lives of 200,000 to 300,000 people. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes committed by the Japanese armed forces. It routinely conducted tests on people who were dehumanized and internally referred to as logs. Experiments included disease injections, controlled dehydration, biological weapons testing, vivisection, organ harvesting, amputation, and standard weapons testing. In other tests, subjects were deprived of food and water to determine the amount of time until death. They were also placed into low-pressure chambers until their eyes popped from their sockets, experimented upon to determine the relationship between temperatures, burns. They were hung upside down until death, crushed with heavy objects, electrocuted, dehydrated with hot fans, injected with animal blood, exposed to lethal doses of X-rays, subjected to various chemical weapons inside gas chambers, injected with seawater, and burned or buried alive. alive. Now this place was truly horrific and so many people suffered. And coming in at number 1 is Blanc Moner. When French authorities received an anonymous tip in 1901 that a woman was being held prisoner at an aristocrat's house in the city of Poitiers, they sent out officers to search the home. Behind the locked door of the pitch black attic, they found a skeletal middle-aged woman laying on a straw mattress covered with her own excrement, while insects and rotting food littered the floor. Now the room's odor was so disgusting that officers couldn't even continue their investigation, but they were able to learn that the 55-pound woman still clinging to life after 25 years trapped in that same room was named Blanc Moner, and that her captor was her own mother. Now this photo of her was taken shortly after she was rescued.
Next up, we have Justin Timberlake, teenage heartthrob, bad boy, crappy ex-boyfriend to Britney Spears, and possible time traveler? Turns out it's entirely possible that Timberlake has been breaking hearts for far longer than was once believed. Also, he might have, at one time, lived in Liverpool. I say that because of this. A side-by-side of Justin Timberlake and the mugshot of an unknown man working in the Liverpool mines far before Justin Timberlake was ever supposed to have been born. It's like that guy's his mirror, and his mirror is staring back at him. As for what the mine worker was charged with, I'm not sure, but I'm willing to bet it ain't nothing but a mistake. In sync, I think. No, Backstreet Boys. Sorry guys. Alright, moving on from music and television celebrities to celebrity activists. She's small, she's mighty, and she might have lived 124 years ago in 1898. It's Greta Thunberg. Before you start yelling, "How dare you make that assumption" at me through your computer screens, take a look at this. An image of a young woman who looks exactly like Greta and wears her hair incredibly similarly to Greta, cultivating the land in a way that Greta would have likely approved of alongside 2 unknown children. Okay, I'm not actually sure what they're doing in the photo, but I don't see any big polluting machinery anywhere in the photo, so I'd say it's probably Greta approved. Maybe because it is Greta. If this is true and Greta Thunberg really is a time traveler, and she's seen the future, maybe we should start listening to her. Next up, we have Keanu Reeves, who has apparently lived many lives over many centuries. That's right, not only has he been in The Matrix, John Wick, Deep Web, The Whole Truth, Devil's Advocate, and so many other big films, apparently he has also been portrayed in paintings dating all the way back to 1530. Now, I'm going to show you a photo, but if it ends up being a bit too much to handle, don't worry, because there's a pill for that. It's either red or blue, I forget which. Anyways, take a look at this 1530 Italian painting of a man who is unknown, but not that unknown because it's clearly Keanu Reeves. You know who else is Keanu Reeves? This guy, Paul Monet, a popular French actor who lived during the late 19th and early 20th century, and because he's Keanu Reeves, also today in the 21st century. It's not a coincidence, it's Keanu. Next up, we've got Eddie Murphy. While some of you might know him from films such as Norbit, The Nutty Professor, Meet Dave, Tower Heist, Trading Places, Mr. Church, and Shrek, my personal favorite, other people know him as the classy man who dressed and photographed quite well during a time long before Eddie Murphy was supposedly born. Take a look. I mean, with the resemblance, it's more than clear as day that these two are one of a kind, probably because they are one man living across time. While this might seem perplexing, the real question here is, do you think the unknown classy man, as he is referred to on the internet, likes parfait? I mean, everybody likes parfait, and waffles, and boulders. That's a nice boulder. Next up, we've got Bruce Willis, star of Die Hard, The Sixth Sense, Glass, Unbreakable, Pulp Fiction, Split, Red, Armageddon, and an army general that was living in the late 19th and 20th century? Well, take a look. That's right, not only has Bruce Willis been awarded countless awards for film and television, including an Emmy, it is entirely possible that at one point Bruce Willis once went by the name Douglas MacArthur and was awarded many medals for providing exemplary service during his time serving as a general for the US military during World War II. Maybe one day he'll play his past self in a movie. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. Next up, we have 2 more than lifelong friends, Daniel Radcliffe and Andy Samberg, 2 great actors with great achievements who have apparently been around for a great deal of time, according to this photograph. A photo taken of the pair in 1978, the year Samberg was supposedly born, and 11 years before Radcliffe's supposed birth, found in an old high school yearbook. Give it up, guys. We know. You're a time traveler, Harry. And Andy's got a time machine in a box. That's a reference. Next up, we have a 19th century McConaughey. That's right, apparently this guy has been ripping through the fabric of space and time since long before Interstellar hit the big screen and the quest to return to Murph ensued. If you've seen the movie or any of these movies, maybe you'll get my references. Anyways, apparently he wasn't always a movie star. At one point he was this guy, just a simple pipe-smoking, bird-watching man from Alabama living, smoking, and watching in the 1800s. The man truly hasn't aged. I guess after so many years of just watching, McConaughey finally decided he'd rather be the watchee, and now he has an Oscar. Next up, not only has Jay-Z been around the block, but according to this photo, he's been around for an incredibly long time, since the 1930s at least, which is when this photo of this man, who looks an awful lot like Jay-Z, was taken in Harlem, not far from where Jay-Z supposedly grew up in Brooklyn. And when I say not far, I mean not far. Harlem to Brooklyn is only about a 50-minute drive, a 1-hour subway, a 1.5-hour bike ride, and a 4.5-hour walk. Why did I look all of that up? For you guys, of course. Considering the fact that this photo was taken in 1939 and Jay-Z supposedly wasn't born until 1964, I say he would have had plenty of time to get from Harlem to Brooklyn, and plenty of time to figure out the lyrics to Empire State of Mind. He's also been quoted saying, "I'm not afraid of dying," probably because he has a time machine that allowed him to go into the future and find the elixir of everlasting life, or something along those lines. And finally we have the speed round. First up, we've got Nick Cage, pictured in the 1800s living under an unknown alias. And then of course there is Johnny Depp, who looks exactly like someone's grandfather, probably because he traveled back in time to hook up with someone under 25, and he is whoever posted this photo's grandfather. It was anonymous on Reddit. Next up we have John Travolta and this guy, who is clearly just John Travolta living in the 1860s. Michael Jackson, who clearly traveled back in time to ancient Egypt, otherwise how the heck would this bust exist? Peter Dinklage obviously wanted a taste of medieval life, hence his appearances on Game of Thrones, and this painting of Sebastian de Mora painted in 1645. And finally, we have Mark Zuckerberg, who traveled all the way back to the 1600s to finally gain some respect as the King of Spain. In 1921, Elizabeth L. Gardner, pictured here in the pilot seat of a Martin B-26 Marauder, became one of the first American female pilots to serve in a world war. She had been trained by Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets, who later went on to command the B-29 aircraft that dropped the first atom bomb on Hiroshima. During her time as an active member of the Air Force, Gardner flew many medium-sized bomber planes, as well as aircrafts that towed aerial targets. In 1939, the WASP organization was formed, WASP being an abbreviation for Women Air Force Service Pilots, after a woman named Jackie Cochran wrote to the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, suggesting the idea of using female pilots in non-combat missions. Gardner joined the organization, which eventually disbanded in 1944. In 2009, after Gardner's many years of service, she and the remaining living members of the WASP organization were recognized with the Congressional Gold Medal for their service, one of the oldest and highest civilian awards given out in the United States.
This photograph was also snapped in the midst of the London Blitz of 1940, a milkman walking through mounds of rubble to carry out his deliveries. War or not, people still needed their milk. This one was taken by a photographer named Fred Morley on October 9th, just a month after the attacks began. Now, although this photo was genuinely taken at the time, right after a bombing the previous night, it is somewhat staged. See, the Ministry of War wanted to keep everyone's morale high, which was not an easy task given that the Germans were destroying people's homes on a nightly basis, so photographs of the destruction were often censored or just kept out of newspapers altogether. Photographer Fred Morley was frustrated by this. Not only did he feel the need to document what was going on, but he felt that people deserved to see what was truly happening as well. So he compromised. Morley grabbed his assistant, dressed him up as a milkman, and had some firemen who were working on bridges nearby pose in the background, and then snapped this now iconic photo. It showed the destruction left in the wake of the previous night's attack, while also sending an uplifting message to the people of England that they weren't going to let the war break them.
If you are currently using a friction heater, aka a radiator, or if you ever have, Charles S.L. Baker, pictured here demonstrating his radiator system in 1906 next to his unnamed assistant, is the man whom you should send your thank you notes. Born into slavery on August 3rd of 1859, at the age of 15, Baker began working as an assistant to his father, who was an express agent at the time. It was then that Baker developed his interest in the mechanical sciences. He spent decades perfecting his invention, experimenting with different forms of friction, using bricks and various types of metal, and after 23 years, he did it. Charles S.L. Baker invented the first ever friction heating device known to man in the form of two metal cylinders stacked one inside of the other with a spinning wooden core in the center to produce the friction, and subsequently heat. After his success, Baker went on to start a manufacturing business for his heating device, the Friction Heat and Boiler Company, which was established in 1904. His company raised $136,000 in capital, equal to almost $5 million today. Baker went on to marry, and his wife eventually gave birth to a daughter named Lulu Bell Baker. When Charles died on May 5th of 1926, he had revolutionized the scientific industry and had changed the way people view the possibilities of simple friction forever.
You're probably thinking this is an AI-generated image, but this is actually a genuine photograph. The photo was captured in 1903. Standing in the middle is a photographer named James Rickleton. On either side of him are the Kashmir Giants. Can't miss them. James Rickleton was a photographer and world traveler in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He set out to explore different cultures and capture their lives through his camera. One of his most fascinating adventures took him to Kashmir, a region in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. There he met these two men, dubbed the Kashmir Giants. The guy on the left stood at 7'9", the one on the right 7'4". Kinda crazy that a 7'4" guy is being dwarfed by an even larger man. That's just nuts.
Here's a photo of a man with a firm grasp on the importance of space travel, watching the 1968 Apollo 8 space launch with his wife. That rocket's going up. The Apollo rocket, that is. The first ever spacecraft to leave Earth's gravitational sphere, and the first manned mission to reach the moon. Although the crew, made up of 3 astronauts, Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, didn't actually step foot on the moon, their spacecraft orbited the lunar body 10 times before returning safely back to Earth. The astronauts aboard Apollo 8 were the first to photograph the far side of the moon, pictured here, and the first to witness an Earthrise, which is like a sunrise but with the Earth.
What an apocalyptic image this is. It looks like a dystopian painting, but it isn't. It's a colorized photograph of the ruins of Stalingrad, one of the biggest, most brutal battles in all of World War II. It took place between August of 1942 and February of 1943. The Germans wanted to capture Stalingrad. It was a key industrial city and would give them control over the Volga River. But the Soviets were determined to defend the city at all costs. And defend it they did. The battle raged for months, with both sides suffering huge losses. Soldiers fought in the streets, buildings, factories. Some of the most intense combat happened house to house. The turning point came in November of 1942, when the Soviets launched a massive counterattack encircling the German forces. This operation, called Operation Uranus, trapped the Germans inside the city with no way to escape. The German troops eventually couldn't hold out, and in February of 1943, they surrendered.
I'm pretty positive every one of you watching this video has heard of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that sank just 4 days after its maiden voyage began, but I bet you haven't seen this photograph. For context, approximately 1,500 people died on April 14th of 1912 after the Titanic struck an iceberg around 2 a.m. and became completely submerged underwater in less than 3 hours. While not a guarantee, those who made it onto the ship's lifeboats did have a higher chance at survival. This photograph shows the Titanic's collapsible lifeboat D, which had been lowered from the port side of the large vessel as it went down. The lifeboat was rescued by the RMS Carpathia, another transatlantic ship, around 7:15 a.m. Ironically, 6 years after rescuing the Titanic survivors after their escape from a sinking ship, the RMS Carpathia would also sink after being struck by a German U-boat.
Oh, mirror selfies, so rarely do they work. This is one of those rare cases. Did people take mirror selfies in the 1920s? Well, this Japanese couple did. This photographer snapped a picture of him and his wife sometime in the 1920s. We don't know the names of these people or the exact date the photo was taken. The only info I could find was that a photographer named Hamish Campbell, who'd been based in Tokyo, came across the photo in 2014 while searching through an abandoned home. On the second floor of the home, Campbell had come across a closet that had once been used as a darkroom. There he found hundreds of negatives, including the image you see here. They were all taken by the man in the picture. Other photographs included his wedding, the day-to-day lives of the family, hangouts with neighbors, and pictures like this here of his pet monkey. Yeah, I think this is just a cute one. Good way to end things off.
Some pretty fascinating things going on. If you learned anything new today, I'm proud of you.
Yeah, let us know down in the comments, and don't forget to keep a hold of, don't get rid of your photographs, all right? Let them stay in the cloud. I'm too tired.
Cheers, friends.